Britain's greatest tank battle. El Alamein, Second Battle. The Second Battle of El Alamein was commanded by, arguably, Britain's greatest commander, Bernard Montgomery. On arrival in North Africa, Montgomery said to his men, "We will fight the enemy where we now stand. There will be no withdrawal and no surrender. If we cannot stay here alive, then let us stay here dead." The Second Battle of El Alamein was the turning point in the North African campaign, and indeed the entire Second World War. So, if this is the Second Battle of El Alamein, how did it come about? Earlier in the year, in May 1942, reinforced and rested, Rommel's African Corps attacks the Gazala line west of Tobruk. Rommel's attack on Tobruk is halted by fierce resistance, but eventually, with overwhelming German air power, Tobruk falls. In ragged order, in the heat, dust and flies, the British Commonwealth Army withdraws to El Alamein and digs in. El Alamein is hardly more than a railway stop, but it is a good defensive position. It is a 30-mile stretch of desert, bordered on the north by the Mediterranean and on the south by the Qattara Depression, a sea of sand, impassable to tanks. At El Alamein, Rommel couldn't outflank the defenders, as he'd done in the past. In late June, the Australian 9th Division, training in Palestine, is rushed to El Alamein to reinforce the line. They are the only division up to full strength. On the 30th of June 1942, Rommel's Africa Corps arrives at El Alamein. The Suez Canal, the British naval base at Alexandria and Cairo are all in danger. 1st of July 1942, Rommel's African Corps and the Italian army attack the British defences at El Alamein. The battle would last for 27 days. Exhausted British, Australian, New Zealand, South African and Indian troops fight Rommel to a standstill. During the battle, the Australian 9th Division attacks along the coast and takes Tel El Elisa. They dig in. Despite repeated counterattacks, the Australians stubbornly hold on. In August 1942, Prime Minister Winston Churchill appointed Montgomery commander of the British 8th Army in North Africa. Montgomery took command of the 8th Army on the 13th of August 1942. Montgomery considered the 8th Army to be truly magnificent material composed of veteran fighting divisions. Montgomery immediately ordered the destruction of all plans for withdrawal. He told his officers there would be no more belly-aching and no more retreats. Montgomery's first job was to reinforce the 30 miles along the front line at El Alamein, taking 2 months to complete. Montgomery immediately asked for 2 new British divisions, the 51st Highlanders and the 44th Home Counties. The British soldiers loved Montgomery. He not only knew what he was doing, but looked after their welfare and their lives. Montgomery was the right man at the right time. The Commonwealth forces also viewed him positively and saw him as a breath of fresh air. Operation Torch, the Allies' invasion of French North Africa, was soon to start. Churchill desperately wanted a victory to remain equal partners in the war with the Americans. No matter what pressure was put on him, Montgomery would not be hurried by Churchill. He would not take the offensive until he had built up his forces, trained his men, and he knew he would win. The British 2-pounder anti-tank gun was by far inferior to the German 88, and Montgomery was waiting to be resupplied with the superior 6-pound anti-tank gun, which could knock out most Axis tanks. Up until June, Rommel had been receiving detailed information about the strength and movement of the British forces from reports sent to Washington by the US military attaché in Cairo. The American code had been stolen by Italian military intelligence from the American embassy in Rome the previous year. Montgomery also had ultra intelligence and knew the break-in by Rommel would be on the southern flank, turning left towards the coast. Montgomery left a hole in his lines where the attack would take place. He deployed most of his armour and artillery behind densely sown minefields around Alam el Halfa Ridge, 20 miles behind the front. His tanks on the ridge were ordered not to attack but stay in their defensive positions on the ridge and act as artillery. On the 31st of August, on a moonlit night, Rommel penetrated the minefields and attacked the British Commonwealth forces in an attempt to encircle and destroy the 8th Army before their reinforcements arrived. 13th Corps was waiting on the Alamein Halfa ridge with 64 batteries of artillery, 300 anti-tank guns and 300 tanks. When the British were alerted to Rommel's attack, Montgomery was woken up and informed. Monty exclaimed, "Excellent, excellent, couldn't be better," and went back to sleep. As Rommel emerged from the minefields, the 7th Army Division attacked his flank, forcing him to turn towards Montgomery's prepared positions on Alamein Halfa ridge. Rommel arrived at Alamein Halfa ridge in the middle of a sandstorm. The British anti-tank guns held fire until the German tanks were within 300 yards, and then all hell broke out. Rommel's attack on the ridge failed, and fearing he would be cut off from his rear, he withdrew. 3rd of September, 22:30 hours, Operation Beresford. As the African Corps withdraws, it is harried on its way by the New Zealand 2nd Division, attacking from Alamein. The New Zealanders inflict heavy losses on the retreating Italians, but things quickly went wrong. The 46th Royal Tank Regiment became lost in the darkness and wandered into a minefield, where 12 of its tanks were lost. The Battle of Alamein Halfa ridge cost the British 696 casualties and the New Zealanders 275 casualties. Following the withdrawal of the African Corps, Montgomery did not counterattack to exploit his victory, for which he would be criticised. Montgomery was not yet prepared for a major battle with the African Corps and did not want his tanks squandered on Rommel's anti-tank screen. Montgomery refused to be manipulated by Rommel and continued to build up his forces for the forthcoming battle. Montgomery's 8th Army included 195,000 men and 1,029 tanks. Rommel commanded 116,000 experienced German and Italian troops, 547 tanks, 500 artillery pieces and 490 anti-tank guns. Rommel's defences were formidable. He was entrenched in a strongly defensive position, protected by barbed wire and deep minefields of over 500,000 mines, known as the Devil's Garden. 7 German and Italian infantry divisions manned the front line, supported by strong anti-tank positions, with 4 armoured divisions behind them and 2 armoured divisions in reserve. But Rommel was short on fuel. Against the odds, Malta had survived, and the sacrifice it made was now paying dividends. Submarines and planes operating out of Malta were severely disrupting Rommel's supply line, with 25% of material and 41% of fuel being sent to the bottom of the Mediterranean during August. In the darkness of the 23rd of October 1942, the Second Battle of El Alamein begins with a massive artillery bombardment from more than 800 guns on the German positions. The South African artillery alone fired 62,000 25-pound shells. In the early hours of the morning, British engineers complete the dangerous task of clearing 2 channels 24-foot wide and 9 miles long through the German minefields. Sunday, 25th of October, 30 Corps attacks in the north and 13 Corps attacks in the south. Through the northern corridor, the 26th and 20th Australian Brigade and the 51st Highland Division advance, the 24th Australian Brigade holding the coast area. Through the southern corridor, the 5th and 6th New Zealand Brigade, with them the 2nd and 3rd South African Brigade, behind them the 10th Armoured Division. To draw in the 21st Panzer Division and the Italian Armoured Divisions to them, a diversionary attack was launched to the south by the 7th Armoured Division and the Free French, with the loss of 31 tanks. The British advance was slow through the dust and smoke of the congested minefield corridors, driving off counterattacks, while German anti-tank guns caused devastating losses. Headway made by the Australian and New Zealand divisions opened up corridors for the tanks to follow. The 26th and 20th Australian Brigade turned northwards and advanced on the enemy guns in what Montgomery called eating the guts out of the enemy. Near the high point, known as Trig 29, the Australians engaged the enemy in fierce hand-to-hand fighting. It was here that Percy Cradwick won his VC. He charged an enemy strong point with bayonet and hand grenades. It cost him his life. The Australian 26th Brigade had taken Thompson's Post but suffered heavy casualties and during the night were relieved by the 24th Brigade. The sheer guts and ferocity of the 9th Australians' thrust towards the coast had made Rommel think the breakout was north along the coast, and now his panzers were in front of the northern corridor. Rommel attempted to break through the Australians with his 21st Panzer Divisions, attacking 25 times with tanks, artillery and Stuka dive bombers. Bloody-minded and stubborn to the end, the Australians would not be broken. The Australian 9th Division, with the 51st Highland Division, kept pushing the Germans along the coast despite their high casualties. The fighting would continue for a week. On Monday the 2nd of November, Montgomery launched Operation Supercharge. The 2nd New Zealand Division was reinforced by the 9th Armoured Brigade and 2 infantry brigades in a successful attempt to blow a hole deep into the enemy front. The 9th Armoured Brigade moved forward into heavy enemy fire by long-range anti-tank guns. The sheer guts and courage of the 9th Armoured Brigade cost it 102 tanks of its 128 tanks. A critical breakthrough was made by determination and courage, and the 9th Armoured Division punched through the German lines and were out into open desert. The German counterattack failed, with Rommel losing over 100 tanks. On the 2nd of November, Rommel informed Hitler that the battle was lost. Hitler refused to give Rommel permission to retreat, saying, "You can show your troops no other road than to that of victory or death." Rommel ignored Hitler's orders and withdrew from the battlefield. He left behind his Italian allies who were without transport. A courageous defence by the Italian 101st, 132nd and 133rd Armoured Divisions, who fought with exemplary courage, stopped the British Armoured Divisions from destroying Rommel's African Corps. The Italians' gallant actions resulted in them being wiped out. They fought to the last round of ammunition and had been let down by their German allies. Rommel's tanks flee across the desert with Montgomery in pursuit. On the 13th of November 1942, Tobruk is recaptured by British Commonwealth forces. During the Battle of El Alamein, German and Italian casualties were 9,000 dead, 15,000 wounded and 30,000 prisoners taken. The British Commonwealth casualties were 4,800 dead and 9,000 wounded. In Britain, for the first time in many years, the church bells rang to celebrate the 8th Army's victory at El Alamein.